Okay, welcome back everybody. Of course, we are learning Python. So let's continue our journey. This time, this particular tutorial will be rather long because there is a lot to talk about here. And I do, as you know, want to talk about it rather slowly. I want to break down my code so that you can see it. You could go ahead and stop the video, run it in your own platform, execute it, and see how it works. So what we're going to do now is learn about the looping structure, the while loop. And this is one of the repetition structures that I mentioned before. So there are two of them, the for loop and the while loop. And we're going to take a look at the while loop today. So if we take a really quick look at my code, we're going to look at this while loop structure. We're going to take a look at this while loop structure. I'm sorry, and there's my first one. So we're going to start off easy. We're going to add the if statement that we already used and the break statement, and then we're going to actually use the Boolean value of false. So let's talk about the while loop itself. So the while loop is designed to execute a set of code, a block code, over and over and over again. Now, essentially, unless you stop it, the while loop will run over and over and over again. Just it won't stop, okay? Not without crashing your computer or hitting Control C or doing something cool. It's just designed to run over and over and over again. However, we can design looping structures to loop a certain number of times. Now, the while loop gives us that opportunity, and the for loop gives us that opportunity just to execute a number of times, 10, 20, 5, 2, doesn't really matter. But both structures give us the way of doing that. And this is how it's done in the while loop structure. So I have created an integer up here called I, and it's evaluated to 0. So 0 is my starting point. Now it doesn't have to be, but by default, we typically use 0 as our starting point. And hopefully over time, I will both talk about that and you will begin to integrate that in your coding and in your thinking. So I have two actually starting points. I have an I equals 0 and a value equals true. So my 0 is my integer, and I'm going to use that as a condition for this while loop and this while loop down here. And I'm going to use my Boolean condition for my last while loop. Okay. Now I do want to make two different tutorials using the while loop. So I'm going to talk about this one first and then come back later on and talk about it again as a refresher, as a review. Now, with that being said, my first while loop, my while loop with a break and count to 1 to 10. So what is my situation here? Well, while I is less than 10, colon, that's the condition by which I am testing the loop, okay? Every time it runs an iteration, and an iteration is a loop, one time through all of the code, okay, one time through all of the code, it's going to go back and test this condition. Now, what is this I? This I is right here, okay? This is a starting point of 0. 0 is less than 10. Now, we know that because we know our math. Okay, so that means that on first count, this will execute. Everything in my code block will execute. Well, what does that mean? The loop, so that means 1, this print statement will execute, okay? This print statement will say the loop count is, and then I have an I plus 1. Now, we already know that we can add values and variables. We saw that already throughout our code so far. And I know that this I is at default a starting point 0. So if I say 0 plus 1, that's 1. okay? That just evaluates to 1, or the expression is 1, okay? So this will say the loop count is 1 for right here. That's all this is saying. The loop count is 1. So I'm just saying, I'm telling the user right now that this is my first iteration through, this is my first loop through, and that's all really, I'm just counting. That's all I'm really doing here. This is the essential element that will get us to where we need to go, and that is to only loop through the structure 10 times, because what I'm doing is I'm taking the value of I, which starts at 0, and I'm taking that value and I'm adding 1 to it. And then I'm assigning that new value to the variable, okay? We talked about being able to change the values of variables from the very beginning. That's why variables are so important to coding, because essentially we want to be able to manipulate them, change them, use them to execute code. And this is one of the ways that we're going to do it. We're going to actually change the value of I on this line. Line 12 changes the value of I. Now, I'm adding a new something to our code, and that's this sleep function. So I'm importing the time module. So I do use the keyword import, and I do use time. So when you download Python, there's a whole bunch of modules that are not, they are available to us, but they're not readily available. So we have to bring them into our code. It's called importing. So we're going to import the time module, and we can access the sleep function by using this dot. So it's time dot sleep, the function, and this is going to represent the number of seconds that I'm going to stop the program. So basically it's going to go to sleep for 1 second. That should make sense. It's just going to not do anything for 1 second. And this is one of the ways of just putting some latency, some delay. And the only reason I'm doing this is because I actually want you to see the loop count through 1 through 10, okay? And that's the only reason why I'm doing this. What I want to do out here is I want to test. Let's just stop it at that point. Let's see if that will stop my program, because I don't want to go to the next, but I don't want to go and comment all of that out. Just don't want to do it. So with that being said, let's run this again, show this, add value, sleep for 1, do it again. Now what's going to happen eventually is I is going to become 9 and then become 10. So 9 is less than 10, and it will execute through that iteration. But when it becomes 10, 10 is not less than 10, 10 is equal to 10. So this expression will evaluate to false. And when it does, that means it's not true. False is not true, and this won't execute. Nothing in here will execute. The actual program, this part of the program will stop. And then of course I want the whole program to stop. So let's take a look at this. So it's doing exactly what I want it to do. Okay, good. It does stop. So in the code, in the print statement, it says add 1 to the value of I, just because if I were to say the loop count is 0, well, that wouldn't make any sense. Just to us, it doesn't make any sense. So just to see that it counts 1 through 10, I've changed the value of I here. But I've changed the value of I here in order for it to execute through this while loop, okay? Because its actual count starts at 0, and all counts by nature in coding start at 0. Then, as you saw, it hesitated a second, and then it went and did it again and again. So good. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to push that code up a bit. Now I'm going to take a look at this. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have I equals 0, because at this point I've changed the value of I. I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do the same thing again, But this time I'm looking for a certain extra condition. This will know, this will run, this will run, this will run. Now, if there is a next line of code, it's going to read that next line of code. My next line of code is my next line of code is my if statement. Now, the first thing we've seen is the one equal sign, and that's an assignment. So we are assigning this value to this variable, this 0 to this I. Here I'm evaluating if they're the same. So equal sign, are they the same? Is I the same as 6? At a certain point, it will be, because we're constantly changing the value of it. We're adding 1 to it. So after at 6, when this goes through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this should tell me I've gone through 6 iterations. Stop, break. There's my keyword break. When it hits 6, break out of this loop. And then stop the code. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to do my first loop structure because I didn't comment it out and I didn't delete it. All good though. We're going to see it execute as it should. And this one did. So it says, if I were to lower this, print count from 1 to 10, break at 6. And if I look at it from where it is, it does print out that statement. It does run through the count. At the print line, I do have that I plus 1, so it actually tells me that I'm in that particular iteration. And then after 6, it does stop. So this does work. And there's my break statement. Cool. Finally, let's look at this last while loop. And I've got some stuff going on here that's really not that important, but all good. This time, I'm using the Boolean condition of value. Now, by default, a while loop has to run when its condition is true. It's only when the condition is false that it will stop executing, okay? And that should be clear because we did it up here and we did it up here. When the while loop, when I was equal to 10, this was no longer true. When I was equal to 10, well, it stopped here, but when I is equal to 10, this while loop condition is false. Here, while value is true, and it's always true, continue to run the program. However, this will run always and forever unless we change the value of value. We have to change it to false. We have to flip it from true to false. How are we going to do that? Well, we could do it in code. We could use an if-else structure, a condition. But right now, what we are looking for is user input. So I have an input statement that says enter stop if you want to stop the program. And what is going to happen here, if user input is the actual word stop, the value of the value variable will move to false. It'll go from true to false. So look at it, consider it, practice it, let's run it. Looking good so far? Looking good. And then if you want to stop the program, type in the word stop. Good. The end. And that's just down here. So I've got to print, I'm moving spaces, hesitate for 2 seconds, and type the end. So good. So this is how the while loop works. We could either get out of it by iterating and then making this statement false. We could get out of it using a break statement, or we can get out of a looping structure, the while loop structure, by changing the true condition to a false condition. Three ways of getting out of a while loop, but it's really important to use. So with that, I will see you